Hey guys, Gaji here. Welcome back as we kind of continue our exploration into the 70s, and especially remember thinking about this theme of, how and why the public lost so much trust in our government overall throughout this decade. And so we've talked about the end of Vietnam, some of the protests, and now we talk a little bit about Richard Nixon and probably a word that you've heard of, something you've seen mentioned, and a lot of people don't really know what it is, at least of a certain age, and that's Watergate. So we'll kind of tell the story of Watergate, and eventually, which leads, well, spoiler alert, to Nixon being the only president to resign. So Nixon, remember, he had won in 68, and he runs in 1972 against a Democrat named George McGovern. McGovern was a very liberal Democrat. Surprised some people that he was nominated. And at the time, Nixon was, well, he was favored to win. Um, you know, he was, you know, relatively popular as presidents go. Yes, the Vietnam War is creating all these protests, and there's a lot of people that don't like him, but um, he was overall favored to win this. But about Nixon, um, how to put this quickly? He was very obsessed with winning, and again, I don't think that makes him different to be a president. Any president, anybody gets that level of politics, there's going to be a certain amount of kind of that drive and obsession with winning elections. But Nixon maybe kind of tips into kind of a more dangerous territory. He he had become really secretive, the very tight group of people that he talked with, only a certain number of kind of people that he would talk to, took criticism really personally and really hard, which again, for a politician, that's not a good, um, not a good character trait because you got to have a very thick skin. You're going to be criticized no matter what. Um, and as it turns out later, what we realize is that he kind of created an enemies list, a list of people who he thought were a threat to him and his presidency, and he would, for example, have the IRS do tax audits against those people, even if they didn't really deserve it, as a way of letting his enemies know that, hey, I'm the president, I have power, I have the ability to make your life miserable. And so, in this information, obviously, we didn't know this yet. Okay, he probably wouldn't have been elected if we had known this. But we start, as we look back, we can realize it helps us understand this scandal a little bit better. And so these obsessions are going to lead to the scandal. And so we're going to talk about Watergate. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you guys a couple of clips. First, I'll show you this clip of the scandal beginning in June of 1972. As you can see, just a few months before the election.
Good evening. We have a mystery story out of Washington. 5 people have been arrested and charged with breaking into the headquarters of the Democratic National Committee in the middle of the night.
The Democratic National Committee is located in the Watergate office building. The burglars forced a stairwell door, then taped its latch open. The door, now part of police evidence, was noticed by one of the guards employed by the Watergate complex. At first, the police found nothing. Then they spied 5 men crouching behind some desks.
Neither the president, obviously, or anybody in the White House, or anybody in authority in any of the committees working for the re-election of the president have any responsibility for it.
Okay, so we get this little story. Wait a minute, somebody broke into the Democratic National Headquarters to get secrets, or they're going to bug the office. That's weird. And they were for an organization, the Committee to Re-elect the President, which had a great acronym. They called themselves CREEP, C-R-E-E-P, Committee to Re-elect the President, which is great. But Nixon didn't know about it, or supposedly didn't know about it, and it's very possible that he didn't at first. And so it happens. Now, a few months later, he wins the election. And what the ironic thing about this whole thing is that this election was a blowout, as you can see here. It's odd that they felt like they needed to raid the headquarters to get secrets about the Democrats because it was one of the bigger blowouts in our history. Landslide election, as you can see here. McGovern virtually, obviously the landslide in the Electoral College, but getting virtually this tiny sliver, relatively speaking, of that popular vote. Well, election happens, and then detail starts to leak out. Okay, so he's never really linked to the break-in, meaning there's no evidence that Nixon told his group of people to say, hey, you need to break in to this hotel and get this information. But again, thinking about his style, his obsessions, kind of just the more negative parts of his personality, it's not a stretch to understand that the people working around him really maybe thought he wanted them to do that, if that makes sense. But what really gets Nixon in trouble, and this is what usually happens with political scandals, is the cover-up. And so what we start to realize is, as now we're starting to investigate what happened, who ordered it. Now you start digging into details. And this is when we find out that Nixon ended up finding out, okay, this is what happened, and tried to cover it up, meaning not let the press find out. So he knew who did it, but didn't want to tell anybody. And then in this and more investigation, and again, I'm really selling this story short. There's a whole 8-episode podcast about this, by the way. Just lost the name of it. But anyway, ask me later. This investigation realizes, we find out he abuses power. And in the end, as things started to come out, he was most likely going to be impeached and very likely going to be convicted by the Senate, meaning if he didn't do anything, he would probably removed from power by Congress. But as you can see here, he resigns before Congress has that chance to impeach. So what I want to do here, guys, I'm going to show you, this is like a series of news clips. One will be a little bit of a repeat of the one I just showed you, but just to sort of, you can kind of see how this was reported on in different parts.
5 men were arrested early Saturday while trying to install eavesdropping equipment at the Democratic National Committee.
The burglars broke through a fire escape door that led to the committee's offices. Some campaign memoranda was found on one of the suspects. Most of the offices, including that of Chairman Lawrence O'Brien, have been checked for electronic bugs, and none has been found.
There are reports tonight that President Nixon has ordered Attorney General Elliot Richardson to fire the special Watergate prosecutor Archibald Cox.
In my view, the President has stated that he would not comply with the appeals court order.
Good morning. The Supreme Court has just ruled on the...
So real quick, so what was happening is Congress created a special prosecutor to investigate it, and then Nixon's threatening to fire that person, which again, why are you firing the person that's investigating into you? Are you abusing your office? Are you abusing the power of the presidency? And then here, just to give you a little background, it turned out that Nixon, because he was kind of paranoid, he actually recorded all the conversations in the White House. And we found out about that. And so we're like, okay, can we listen to those recordings? And he was like, no, you can't listen to those recordings because I'm the president, and that's what they call executive privilege, meaning all these recordings are privileged to the president, meaning the public can't hear them. They could have national security issues. And as the president, Richard Nixon, would be able to keep them from the press. Well, this ultimately goes to the Supreme Court to find out whether or not we can hear these tapes, and this is what happens.
Controversy, and here's Carl Stern, who has that ruling. It is a unanimous decision, Doug, 8-0. Justice Rehnquist took no part in the decision ordering the President of the United States to turn over the tapes.
Good evening. President Nixon stunned the country today by admitting that he held back evidence from the House Judiciary Committee, keeping it a secret from his lawyers and not disclosing it in public statements. The news has caused a storm in Washington, and some of Mr. Nixon's most loyal supporters are calling for his resignation.
I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow. Vice President Ford will be sworn in as president at that hour in this office. And so we leave with high hopes, in good spirit, and with deep humility, and with very much gratefulness in our hearts.
So there goes Nixon. Very famous shot of him leaving. Again, the only president to have resigned from office. Would have likely been the only president to be impeached and removed from office, really all stemming for that Watergate scandal. So again, just start to add this stuff up, guys. Whether it's the problems with the Vietnam War and then all the protests on top of that and some of the deadly responses to those protests, and then you've got Watergate. We have a president now admitting that he's covering up, his party's, his group's invasion, breaking into the other party headquarters, and then in the investigation there, we're seeing a lot of what we would consider abuse of power. This is what, this is how the public's trust in government is going to be really hurt. And so we see that resignation in August 1974. And then we have a new president, Gerald Ford. Now, real quick, I'm going to end with this, and then we'll pick it up next time. But understand that Gerald Ford himself, he wasn't Nixon's original vice president. Nixon's vice president was a guy by the name of Spiro Agnew, who himself had to resign because of a different investigation and scandal. And so Gerald Ford, he takes office, a little bit of trivia for you. He's the only person to be president who was never elected either as vice president or president. He was a congressperson who was named and appointed as vice president by Nixon, but then he becomes president. So he becomes the president of the United States even though he never showed up on a ballot. And so that's going to be a real challenge for him as well. So we're going to go ahead and stop there. I'll pick up with this next time, talk a little bit about Ford and then into Carter.